The Federation thinks unity means uniformity, she told her international staff. We're showing them that true unity comes from combining our differences, not erasing them. In orbit, Admiral Kang's tactical display showed Federation forces losing ground on every continent. Each defeat came from a different combination of fighting styles, making it impossible to develop effective countermeasures. They're not just sharing techniques, his tactical officer reported. They're creating entirely new ways of fighting. Every time we encounter their forces, they fight differently than before. General Yoon studied the global battlefield map with satisfaction. South African tracking experts were teaching their skills to British special forces. American logistics specialists were learning Middle Eastern desert supply techniques. Each combination created new tactical possibilities that the Federation couldn't predict. This is humanity's true strength, she told her commanders. We've spent our history fighting each other, learning countless ways to wage war. Now we're combining all that knowledge against a common enemy. The Federation's rigid command structure began to crumble under the strain of facing an enemy that fought like 1,000 armies in one. Their tactical computers, programmed with millions of battle scenarios, couldn't predict what humans would do next because humans themselves were inventing new ways to fight every day. As the sun set on another day of global combat, General Yoon watched her unified human forces push back the alien invaders on every front. The Federation had expected to find a divided planet of primitive warriors. Instead, they found themselves facing the combined military knowledge of all human history, adapted and evolved in ways they could never have predicted. Humanity's greatest weakness, its long history of warfare between nations, had become its greatest strength in facing an external threat. The Federation was learning, too late, that unity doesn't mean everyone fighting the same way. True unity meant combining every way of fighting into something entirely new. Dr. Song stared at the quantum communication device, salvaged from a downed Federation ship, her eyes wide with realization. Her team had spent months studying the alien technology, but they hadn't been trying to copy it. They'd been looking for ways to break it. This isn't just a communication system, she explained to her team, pointing to the complex patterns of quantum entanglement. It's a gateway into their entire network. And if we can get in. The laboratory hummed with activity as scientists and engineers worked around the clock. They weren't trying to build a better communication device. Instead, they were turning it into something the Federation would never expect. A weapon. Lieutenant Park stood at attention in the briefing room as Dr. Song explained their discovery. The Federation's entire combat network relies on quantum entanglement, she said. They think it's unhackable because it's based on physics, not programming, but they never considered someone might weaponize the entanglement itself. The plan they developed was uniquely human. Take something designed for one purpose and turn it into something completely different. They would use the Federation's own communication network to deliver their attack. Are you sure this will work? Park asked, studying the modified quantum devices his team would carry. Dr. Song smiled. They expect us to attack their shields, their weapons, their armor. They're not prepared for us to attack the very fabric of their communications. The assault began at dawn. Park led his Special Forces team toward the Federation's main Earth base, a massive fortress of crystalline structures and energy shields. The aliens had built it to withstand any conventional attack. But this wouldn't be a conventional attack. Remember, Park told his team through their secure comms, we're not trying to break in. We're trying to break their reality. The Federation guards saw nothing unusual at first. Their sensors showed small groups of humans approaching. Surely a suicide mission against their superior defenses. Admiral Kang himself watched from orbit, expecting another futile human attack. Then Dr. Song's team activated their modified quantum devices. As the patrol scattered in confusion, dozens of modified civilian drones swooped down from the rooftops. They weren't military drones, just ordinary delivery drones retrofitted with crude but effective weapons. The aliens' armor, designed to stop high-energy attacks, proved surprisingly vulnerable to the simple thermite charges the drones dropped. "Their armor is failing," one of the alien soldiers shouted. His warning was cut short as the thermite burned through his suit's joints. Private Han watched from his hidden position as his homemade weapons proved devastatingly effective. The thermite burned hot enough to melt through the aliens' advanced armor, and there was nothing high-tech about it. Just basic chemistry turned into a weapon. The aliens tried to retreat, but every direction led to another trap. The humans had rigged the entire neighborhood. Store security shutters slammed down, blocking escape routes. Traffic signals suddenly blazed to life, their intense LED lights overwhelming the aliens' sensitive optical sensors. "Move to Phase 2, Kim ordered through the radio. The subway tunnels beneath the aliens' feet came alive with activity. The Resistance had mapped every maintenance shaft, every utility tunnel, every forgotten passage under the city. Now they used them all. Small teams emerged from hidden entrances, struck fast, and disappeared again before the aliens could respond. In her command center aboard the flagship, Captain Sun watched the disaster unfold through the aliens' combat feeds. "This is unprecedented," she reported to Admiral Kang. "They're not just fighting us, they're using the entire city as a weapon." The Resistance fighters moved through their city like ghosts, using their intimate knowledge of every street and building. They had spent their lives in this urban maze, and now they turned that knowledge into a devastating advantage. Kim's team struck again and again, never staying in one place long enough to be caught. They used the city's own systems against the invaders. Power grid fluctuations to disrupt alien sensors, water pressure changes to flood tunnels, even the subway's ventilation system to spread blinding smoke. "They're not just adapting our weapons," Sun continued her report. "They're creating new ones from whatever they have available. Every piece of civilian infrastructure becomes a potential threat." In the streets below, the alien patrol had been completely destroyed, not by advanced weapons or superior technology, but by simple chemistry and intimate knowledge of the urban battlefield. Kim's fighters quickly collected any useful alien equipment and disappeared back into their tunnel network. "Set up for the next patrol," Kim ordered as his team regrouped in their hidden command post. "They'll send reinforcements soon, probably with heavier weapons. We'll be ready." Han began preparing more thermite charges, their simple but effective weapon proving its worth. Around him, other Resistance fighters modified more civilian drones, rigged more traps, and prepared to turn more of their city's infrastructure against the invaders. The aliens had come expecting to fight a conventional war against primitive weapons. Instead, they found themselves facing an enemy that could turn everything around them into a weapon. Every streetlight could blind them, every manhole could hide a trap, every civilian drone could become a deadly attacker. As night fell over Seoul, the Resistance prepared for another round of combat. They didn't need advanced alien technology to fight. They just needed their city, their knowledge, and their determination to survive. The Federation was learning a harsh lesson. In urban warfare, the humans' creativity and adaptability made them far more dangerous than any advanced weapon could. Dr. Song sat in her underground lab, surrounded by screens displaying Federation communication intercepts. Her team had spent months studying the aliens' behavior patterns, social structures, and most importantly, their fears. What they discovered changed the entire course of the war. "Look at this," she told her team, pointing to a behavioral analysis. "The Federation has conquered dozens of species, but they all fought in predictable ways. They've never faced an enemy that adapts and changes like we do. The aliens' rigid social structure was their weakness. They couldn't understand or cope with humanity's chaos and unpredictability." Dr. Song's team began exploiting this weakness in ways the Federation never expected. "The preservation isn't just about the ships," Han Bin explained. "We've maintained all the original documentation, training manuals, and tactical guides. Our crews are trained in both modern space warfare and historical naval combat. They can fight these ships exactly as they were fought centuries ago, but with the addition of modern technology." Admiral Jinho turned to the council members. What you're seeing here is humanity's greatest advantage. The Empire expects us to fight like a young spacefaring race. Instead, we'll show them 500 years of naval combat experience, updated for the space age. As they prepared to leave, Han Bin led them to one final viewport. Before them floated the U.S. Missouri, the mighty battleship where World War II had officially ended. Her hull now bristled with a mixture of original guns and modern weapons, a perfect symbol of this unique fleet. When does the Empire expect our answer? Han Bin asked. 5 days, Jinho replied. More than enough time to mobilize the fleet. They're expecting tribute ships laden with Earth's resources. Instead, they'll get the combined naval might of human history. As the council members boarded their transport back to Earth, Lena took one last look at the assembled fleet. These ships, preserved as a testament to human history, were about to write a new chapter in humanity's story. The Empire thought they were dealing with a simple planetary civilization. They were about to learn that humanity's past was just as dangerous as its present. Chief Engineer Sun Mai wiped grease from her hands as she supervised the installation of shield generators into the U.S. Missouri's hull. Around her, hundreds of engineers and historians worked together, transforming museum pieces into weapons of war. The massive battleship floated in its maintenance dock, surrounded by work crews in spacesuits. Sparks flew as they carefully integrated modern technology into the historic vessel. The ship's original gray paint gleamed under the work lights, its massive gun turrets still as imposing as they had been centuries ago. The Empire expects energy weapons and modern tactics, she explained to Admiral Jinho, who had come to check on their progress. They've never seen a 16-inch naval gun modified to fire plasma shells. We're keeping the original firing mechanisms, just upgrading what they deliver. Nearby, Captain Kita drilled his crew in operating the hybrid systems. Ancient wheel and modern holographic controls worked in perfect harmony. The bridge of the Missouri was a unique blend of old and new brass fittings and steel wheels, alongside holographic displays and quantum computers. Sun Mi led Jinho through the battleship's corridors. Engineers were everywhere, carefully running power conduits alongside the original steam pipes. The biggest challenge, she explained, was integrating the shield generators without compromising the ship's original structure. We wanted to keep as much of her historical integrity as possible. They stopped at one of the main gun turrets. Inside, crews were modifying the massive guns while maintaining their original loading mechanisms. "Watch this," Sun Mai said proudly, activating a test sequence. The ancient hydraulics whirred to life, moving the giant barrel with the same precision it had shown in World War II. But now, modern targeting systems helped guide its aim, and the shells it would fire were far more devastating than anything its original designers had imagined. "How are the crews adapting?" Jinho asked, watching a team practice loading procedures that combined centuries-old techniques with new technology. "Better than expected," Kita answered, joining them at the turret. Many of them are military history enthusiasts. They understand both the old and new systems. It's like they've been preparing for this their whole lives. The tour continued to the engine room, where the biggest changes were visible. The original boilers had been replaced with fusion reactors, though the massive steam turbines remained, now powered by the heat of artificial stars rather than burning oil. "We've kept the original propulsion concept," Sun Mai explained. "The Empire's sensors will detect steam power and assume we're completely primitive. They won't realize our steam is generated by fusion reactors hot enough to match a sun." Throughout the ship, similar transformations were taking place. The Combat Information Center still had its original plotting tables, but now they displayed holographic battle maps. The radar room contained both vintage scanning equipment and quantum sensors that could detect ships light years away. "The best part," Kita said with a smile, "is that we can switch between old and new systems instantly. If the Empire manages to disable our modern technology, we can still fight using the original systems. They'll never expect that." In the mess hall, now equipped with both traditional tables and modern food synthesizers, crews study battle tactics from both centuries past and the modern era. They learn to combine old naval warfare techniques with space combat maneuvers in ways that had never been attempted before. "We've run simulations," Sun Mai told Jinho. "The Empire's combat computers are programmed to counter modern weapons and tactics. They have no protocols for dealing with a battleship that can fight like it's 1945 one moment, and then switch to 25th century combat the next." As they completed their inspection, they stepped onto the Missouri's deck, protected from space by modern force fields that shimmered like heat waves above water. The massive guns pointed out into the void, ready to fire shells that combine nuclear warheads with plasma containment fields. "Will she be ready in time?" Jinho asked, looking at his old friend with concern. Sun Mi nodded confidently. "The Missouri will lead the fleet, just as she's done before. The Empire thinks they're facing a primitive civilization. Instead, they'll face the combined ingenuity of centuries of human warfare, updated for the space age." As the Admiral prepared to leave, Sun Mi grabbed his arm. "Tell the Council not to worry. These ships helped us win our greatest wars on Earth. Now they'll help us win our first major war in space. The Empire has no idea what they're about to face." Above them, crews continued their work, preparing the mighty battleship for one more fight. The Missouri had been present at the end of humanity's greatest conflict. Now, centuries later, she would help prevent humanity from becoming slaves to an alien empire. The old ship seemed to understand her role, her steel hull gleaming proudly under the stars. In the shadow of Saturn, Commander Minwu watched from the bridge of his Spanish galleon as Imperial scout ships approached. The wooden ship's sails had been replaced with solar collectors, but its proud lines remained unchanged. The Santa Maria II, as she had been christened, floated silently among Saturn's rings, her wooden hull treated with space-age polymers that gave it the same rich, deep color it would have had centuries ago on Earth's oceans. The bridge crew worked quietly at their stations, an odd mix of period-accurate wheels and levers alongside holographic displays. Through the reinforced glass windows, designed to look like the original ship's windows, but capable of withstanding space combat, Minwu could see 3 Imperial scout ships approaching. "Look at those fools," the Imperial commander's transmission crackled. "They've sent primitive vessels. This will be over quick." The transmission cut off as the galleon's broadside of plasma-enhanced cannons tore through the scout ship shields. The Imperial vessel erupted in a brilliant flash, its remnants scattering across space like modern flotsam and jetsam. "Reload all cannons," Minwu ordered, his voice calm despite the excitement coursing through him. The crew worked with practiced efficiency, loading the ancient-looking cannons with modern plasma shells. The sound of wooden wheels on wooden decks mixed with the hum of power conduits. The remaining 2 Imperial ships hesitated, their sensors no doubt struggling to understand what had just happened. They had approached expecting to find primitive wooden vessels, easy targets to destroy as a show of force. Instead, they found themselves facing weapons they couldn't comprehend. "Enemy vessels are charging weapons," reported the sensor officer, her hands moving between an old brass telescope and a quantum scanning display. "They're trying to target our power systems, sir." Minwu smiled. "They won't find any. Not where they're looking." The Santa Maria UU's power core was disguised as the ship's original hold, hidden beneath layers of wood and modern stealth materials. The Empire's sensors would only see what appeared to be an empty cargo space. "Hard to starboard," Minwu commanded. The helmsman spun the great wooden wheel, and the galleon turned with a grace that would have impressed the ancient sailors who had inspired her design. Modern thrusters, disguised as wooden decorations along the hull, provided the actual propulsion. The Imperial ships opened fire, their energy weapons slicing through space where the galleon had been moments before. Minwu waited until they had committed to their attack run, then gave the order he'd been waiting to use since taking command. "Prepare for broadside. Gun crews at the ready." The port side gun ports opened, revealing rows of cannons that looked like they belonged in a museum. The gun crews worked their ancient mechanisms, aided by targeting computers hidden within the wooden gun carriages. Fire as she bears. The broadside crashed out, 30 cannons firing in perfect sequence. Instead of iron balls, they launched plasma-contained antimatter charges. The first Imperial ship shields flared and died under the assault, its hull cracking open like an egg. The second managed to raise additional shields, but the unusual attack pattern confused its defensive computers. "They're calling for reinforcements," the communications officer reported, her modern headset incongruous against her period-accurate uniform. The Imperial commander sounds confused. "I imagine he is," Minwoo replied. "Reload and prepare for another pass. Let's show them what this old girl can do." As the gun crews worked, Minwoo watched the remaining Imperial ship trying to maneuver into a better position. Its crew was probably trained to deal with modern space combat, with its energy weapons and missile salvos. They had no doctrine for dealing with broadside attacks from what appeared to be a wooden sailing ship. "Sir, Imperial reinforcements are arriving," the sensor officer called out. 5 vessels, heavy cruiser class. Minwoo touched a hidden control panel, disguised as an old map case. "Time to show them our other surprises. Signal the fleet. Execute pattern Nelson." From their hiding places among Saturn's rings, other ships of humanity's historical fleet emerged. A World War II destroyer group appeared from behind one of the larger ring fragments. A squadron of ancient submarines, their hulls modified for space combat, decloaked near the Imperial formation. And from the shadow of Titan, a flight of Spitfire fighters launched, their propellers replaced with ion drives, but their forms still unmistakably those of Earth's most famous fighter aircraft. The Imperial reinforcements hesitated, their sensors no doubt giving them impossible readings. Here were vessels that shouldn't be able to function in space, using weapons that shouldn't exist, executing battle tactics from centuries before humanity had achieved spaceflight. "All batteries, fire at will," Minwoo commanded. The Santa Maria Fuse guns roared again, joined by the modern enhanced weapons of humanity's preserved fleet. The space around Saturn lit up with the combined fury of centuries of naval warfare, adapted for this new battlefield. As the battle began in earnest, Minwoo allowed himself a small smile. The Empire had expected to find a primitive civilization ready to submit to their demands. Instead, they found themselves facing the combined naval heritage of humanity, enhanced by modern technology, but fighting with the tactics and courage that had won wars throughout Earth's history. The Santa Maria II turned for another pass, her wooden hull gleaming in the light of Saturn's rings, ready to show the galaxy that humanity's past was just as dangerous as its present. Admiral Jin-ho coordinated from the Missouri as hundreds of historical vessels emerged from hiding. The massive battleship's bridge hummed with activity as crew members worked at stations that blended World War II equipment with modern technology. Through the armored windows, he watched as World War II submarines performed FTL jumps behind Imperial cruisers. Ancient destroyers launched salvos that confused Imperial targeting systems. "They can't adapt," Captain Yonghe reported from her British frigate. "Their combat computers are trying to apply standard tactics to ships that shouldn't even exist." Her vessel, HMS Warrior, was exchanging fire with an Imperial cruiser, its wooden sides somehow withstanding energy weapons that should have vaporized them instantly. The Empire's neat formations broke apart as they faced weapons and strategies their advanced systems had never encountered. Their mighty ships, each the size of a small city, found themselves surrounded by vessels their sensors classified as harmless antiques. U.S. Enterprise Group, commence attack pattern 3, Jin-ho ordered. The ancient aircraft carrier, now modified for space combat, launched waves of fighters. World War II Corsairs and Hellcats, their engines replaced with ion drives, but their forms unchanged, swarmed around the Imperial capital ships like angry wasps. From his tactical display, Jin-ho watched as German U-boats, their hulls now capable of FTL travel, emerged from hyperspace inside the Empire's formation. They launched torpedoes modified with antimatter warheads, their ancient targeting systems proving more effective than modern ones because they relied on human intuition rather than predictable computer algorithms. Missouri Actual to all ships, Jin-Ho broadcast. Commence Operation Crossroads. It was a fitting name, taken from the nuclear tests that had once demonstrated the power of atomic weapons. Now it would show the Empire the full might of Earth's preserved fleet. The Missouri's main batteries elevated, their massive barrels tracking Imperial targets. All guns, fire as she bears, Jin-Ho commanded. The ship shuddered as her 16-inch guns roared, launching shells that combined conventional explosives with plasma containment fields. The Imperial ship shields, designed to stop energy weapons, proved surprisingly vulnerable to these hybrid attacks. "Sir, enemy fleet is trying to regroup," his tactical officer reported. "They're falling back to standard defensive formations." Jin-Ho smiled. "Exactly as expected. Signal the submarine wolf packs. Execute pattern dunnets." Across the battlefield, more submarines emerged from FTL jumps. They had been waiting for this moment, using tactics developed by German Admiral Karl Dönitz in World War II, but now applied to three-dimensional space combat. The Imperial ships, trying to maintain their tight formation, made perfect targets. "Report from HMS Victory," his communications officer called out. "Captain Park says their broadside tactics are working. Imperial shields can't adapt to simultaneous impact from multiple solid projectiles." The Victory, Nelson's flagship from the Battle of Trafalgar, was proving particularly effective. Its wooden construction confused Imperial targeting systems, while its broadside of gravity-accelerated cannonballs, enhanced with modern warheads, tore through ships that should have been far beyond its capability to harm. "Sir, Imperial command ship is launching fighters," the radar operator reported. The Empire's sleek, modern craft emerged from their hangars, only to find themselves engaged by aircraft from 3 centuries of warfare. Spitfires and Zeros, Space Corsairs and Wildcats, all modified for space, but retaining their original maneuverability and piloting requirements. Jin-Ho watched as an Imperial cruiser, its shields failing under repeated attacks from weapons its designers had never imagined, tried to target the Missouri. The battleship's original armor, enhanced with modern materials but still fundamentally the same steel that had shrugged off kamikaze attacks, absorbed the energy blasts with surprising effectiveness. "All batteries, target that cruiser," he ordered. The Missouri's 9 16-inch guns spoke as one, their shells carrying enough force to crack the Imperial vessel's hull. Modern weapons followed through the breach, and the mighty ship began to break apart. "Sir, enemy fleet is showing signs of confusion," his tactical officer reported with satisfaction. "Their combat computers are trying to find patterns in our attacks, but each ship is fighting according to its own historical doctrine." That was the true genius of their strategy. The Empire relied on predictable, computer-controlled combat patterns, but they were facing ships from every era of human naval warfare, each fighting according to the tactics that had made them effective in their own time. There was no pattern for their computers to detect, no standard response they could formulate. The Missouri shuddered as an Imperial blast struck her port side. Damage control teams, trained in both modern and historical repair techniques, rushed to contain the damage. The old ship proved as resilient as ever, her combination of old and new technology making her nearly impossible to disable completely. "Signal from Captain Yonga," the communications officer reported. "HMS Warrior has successfully disabled their target. She's moving to support the submarine group." Jin-Ho nodded with satisfaction. The battle was far from over, but its outcome was becoming clear. The Empire had expected to face a primitive civilization armed with a few modern weapons. Instead, they found themselves fighting the combined naval experience of human history, enhanced by modern technology, but retaining all the qualities that had made these ships legendary in their own times. The Missouri's guns thundered again, And Jinho allowed himself a small smile. Humanity's past was proving more than a match for the Empire's present. These ships, preserved as museums but maintained ready for war, were writing a new chapter in naval history, one that would be remembered as long as humans sailed the seas of space. Commander Sun Mi's carrier group struck from the dark side of Jupiter, launching fighters that combined propeller engines with energy shields. The Empire's fleet scattered, unable to counter attacks coming from vessels their sensors classified as non-threats. The massive gas giant's radiation belts helped mask her approach, just as cloud cover had once hidden aircraft carriers on Earth's oceans. From the bridge of the U.S. Enterprise, Sun Mi watched as her first wave of fighters emerged from the launch tubes. The sight was extraordinary. World War I aircraft, their shapes unchanged but their systems enhanced with modern technology, streaking across space with their propellers spinning inside energy fields that let them maneuver as if they were still in atmosphere. Wildcats and Hellcats, form up on Attack Vector 3, she ordered. The fighters moved into their combat formations, just as they had over the Pacific nearly 3 centuries ago. Corsair groups, prepare for attack run on their capital ships. The Empire's fleet was already in disarray from battles with other elements of Earth's historical fleet. Their neat formations had been broken by broadsides from wooden ships of the line and torpedo attacks from submarines. Now they faced another weapon they hadn't expected, carrier-based aircraft that their sensors couldn't properly track. First wave, engage at will, Sun Mi commanded. The fighters dove into battle, their ancient guns now firing plasma bolts while their wings carried modern missiles alongside replicas of their original weapons. Imperial point defense systems, programmed to track and destroy modern spacecraft, struggled to lock onto targets that moved like atmospheric aircraft. In the chaos, Admiral Jinho ordered the final push. The Missouri's main batteries thundered, ancient gunpowder and modern plasma combining to tear through Imperial shields. The massive battleship led a formation of vessels from every era of naval warfare. World War I destroyers, Age of Sail frigates, Cold War cruisers, all modified for space, but fighting with their original tactics. Enemy flagship detected. Sun Mi's tactical officer reported. They're trying to coordinate a counterattack. Sun Mi smiled. Launch second wave. Target their command and control systems. More fighters streamed from Enterprise's launch tubes, joining the battle that now raged across the space near Jupiter. The Empire's superior technology proved surprisingly vulnerable to attacks it hadn't been designed to counter. High Lord Ko's flagship turned to retreat, followed by the remnants of his once proud fleet. The massive vessel, large enough to house a small city, found itself harried by fighters that should have been museum pieces. Its shields flickered under the combined assault of historical weapons enhanced by modern science. All carriers, launch remaining fighters, Sun Mi ordered. Don't let them regroup. The Enterprise was joined by other carriers, the Yorktown, the Akagi, the Ark Royal, each sending waves of fighters into the battle. The space around Jupiter filled with combat aircraft from every nation that had ever launched planes from a carrier's deck. From her command station, Sun Mi watched as a squadron of Hellcats caught an Imperial cruiser trying to escape. The ancient fighters, piloted by crews trained in both historical and modern combat techniques, executed an attack run that could have come straight from the Battle of Midway. Their weapons, however, were far more devastating than anything their original designers had imagined. Enemy fleet is in full retreat, her tactical officer reported with barely contained excitement. Their formation is completely broken. The Empire's mighty ships, each one a testament to advanced technology, were being driven back by vessels they had dismissed as primitive. Their combat computers, programmed to counter modern weapons and tactics, had no answer for attacks that combined centuries of naval warfare experience with space-age technology. Signal from Admiral Jinho, the communications officer announced. All ships to execute final victory protocol. Sun Mi nodded. Launch all remaining aircraft. Target their engines and retreat vectors. The last of her fighters joined the battle as the Missouri's guns thundered one final time. High Lord Ko's flagship, its shields failing and its hull breached in multiple places, made an emergency jump to FTL, abandoning its escorts to their fate. The remaining Imperial ships, realizing their command had fled, began retreating in disorder. Some managed to escape into FTL, while others fell to the combined fire of Earth's historical fleet. The space around Jupiter, which had seen humanity's first major space battle, now witnessed its first major victory. "Stand down, alert fighters," Sun Mai ordered as the last Imperial ship disappeared. "Begin recovery operations." Her deck crews, wearing space suits that somehow managed to incorporate elements of traditional naval uniforms, prepared to recover the fighters that had helped win this unprecedented victory. As the Enterprise maneuvered to rejoin the main fleet, Sun Mi took a moment to appreciate the significance of what had just happened. The Empire had come expecting to find a primitive civilization ready to submit to their demands. Instead, they found that humanity's past was just as dangerous as its present, perhaps even more so, because it was completely unexpected. The carrier's deck was soon busy with returning fighters, their propellers still spinning inside their energy fields as they landed just as their predecessors had done on Earth's oceans. Each one was a perfect blend of old and new technology, a symbol of humanity's ability to adapt its history to face new challenges. The battle was over. Humanity had won its first major space battle, not with superior technology, but by combining its rich naval heritage with modern innovations in ways the Empire had never imagined possible. As Sun Mai watched the last of her fighters land, she knew that the galaxy would never look at Earth the same way again. The United Earth Council chamber was silent as Admiral Jinho finished his report. Humanity's victory had come not from superior technology, but from preserving their history and adapting it in ways the Empire never imagined. The holographic displays showed recordings of the battle, wooden ships firing broadsides in space, World War I fighters engaging Imperial vessels, submarines performing FTL ambushes. "The Empire has withdrawn their demand for tribute," he concluded. "More importantly, they've spread word about our primitive fleet. No one else will threaten Earth anytime soon." His weathered face showed pride as he gestured to the footage of the U.S. Missouri leading the final assault, her ancient guns proving as effective in space as they had been on Earth's oceans. Lena smiled. "Sometimes the best way forward is to remember where we came from." She stood up from her council seat, looking at the assembled leaders of Earth. "This victory belongs not just to our current generation, but to every sailor, pilot, and submarine commander whose tactics we used." In the Kuiper Belt Museum, a new wing was being constructed, one that would tell the story of how humanity's past had saved its future. Chief Curator Han Bin walked through the partially completed exhibits, making notes on his tablet. Around him, workers installed displays showing how each class of historical vessel had been modified for space combat. "The British section is nearly complete," his assistant reported, pointing to a display featuring HMS Victory. The ancient ship of the line had accounted for 3 Imperial vessels during the battle, its broadside tactics proving surprisingly effective against modern shields. Han Bin nodded approvingly. "Make sure we include Captain Park's battle footage. The public should see how we combined old and new technologies." The display showed how the Victory's wooden hull had been treated with space-age polymers while maintaining its original appearance. In another section, engineers were installing a full-scale cutaway model of a World War I submarine. Visitors would be able to see how modern FTL drives had been integrated into the original diesel-electric design, and how the torpedo tubes had been modified to launch both traditional and modern weapons. "Commander Sun Mi's carrier group footage is ready for review," and technician called out. The holographic display sprang to life, showing waves of propeller-driven fighters engaging Imperial ships. The sight of Corsairs and Wildcats flying combat missions in space had become one of the most iconic images of the battle. Back in the council chamber, Admiral Jinho was concluding his recommendations. "We should continue the preservation program," he advised. "The Empire won't be the last advanced civilization we encounter, and our historical fleet gives us an advantage they can't counter. Councillor Park, who had initially opposed the program's cost, stood up. "I move that we increase funding for the historical fleet," he announced, "and that we begin sharing this technology with all nations that contributed vessels to our victory." The vote was unanimous. Around the world, nations began preparing their own historical vessels for space adaptation. The British Royal Navy launched a program to restore more ships of the line. The Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force began converting their preserved World War II vessels. The German Navy started adapting U-boat tactics for space warfare.